Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Professor Ipshita Bansal from BPS Women's University, Sonipat. Today we are going to talk on the module Interpersonal Communication from the paper Business Communication. By the end of this module, the students will be able to understand first the concepts of interpersonal communication, second, the importance of effective interpersonal communication, and third, we'll learn to develop the skills of effective interpersonal communication. It is the process of communication which takes place face to face. In this process, the feelings, emotions, and thoughts are being shared through verbal and non-verbal messages. It not only involves the message, but how that message is being said through voice tone, gestures, and facial expressions. Interpersonal communication is all pervasive, whether it is social or professional domain. How people communicate in professional domains depend to a large extent on how they have been communicated in their social domains. This is because a person's style and capability of effective communication depends on his or her worldview, values, belief, attitudes to different stimuli. It also depends on personality and related psychological forces like self-esteem, needs, wants, desires, motivations, insecurities of life, etc. of the communicator. In business, the nature and quality of interpersonal communication will have an impact on the employee relations, peer relations, sales performance, customer relationships, conflict management, public relations, etc. Hence, effective interpersonal communication is extremely important for smooth running of all the functions of the business. Elements of interpersonal communication. First element, the communicator. The communication process involves two people who exchange their views and thoughts. It is not a one-way process, but instead it is a two-way process where there is exchange of ideas, feelings, and emotions as a two-way process simultaneously. Second element, the message. The message not only includes the verbal speech involved in the communication process, but also the non-verbal aspects involving facial expressions, voice tones, and gestures. This provides additional information on the message to be shared. Third element, noise. Noise plays important role in communication process. It not only includes the physical noise which distorts the message, but also the noise in the form of inappropriate words, jargons, disinterest, language used, and cultural differences, etc. These factors act as a barrier to effective interpersonal communication. The next element is feedback. Feedback helps the sender to get to know how the message being taken by the receiver, and did the receiver get the message correctly or not. Feedback can be given verbally or through non-verbal expressions, and it can be given in writing also. The fifth element is context. Communication process involves social context and situational context. Situational context involves the place where message has been exchanged, like in office, outdoor, home, or any other place. Social context involves responsibilities, roles, and status of the participants. The sixth element is channel. It involves the means by which the message is transferred In face-to-face communication, it is the facial expressions and speech which is the channel. In case of telephonic conversation, speech is the only channel that is involved in the process. Categorization of interpersonal communication on the basis of participants. It can be in three ways. Dyadic communication. It involves two people, for example, two people talking. Group communication. This process involves three or more persons gathered together for solving problems or taking decisions. The smaller the group, the more closely it resembles the interpersonal communication. For example, university study group. Public communication. It involves large group of people with primary same style of communicating with minimal feedback. For example, university class lecture. Now let's understand the categorization of interpersonal communication on the basis of functions. First, organizational communication. It is the process that involves communication in large organization. For example, work-related discussions between employers and employees. Family communication. Communication between nuclear and extended families. Communication pattern differs based on the participants involved in the process, like spouses, parents, children, siblings. Social communication. This is the unofficial communication which may take place within or outside the organization to satisfy the need of social interaction. Process of interpersonal communication. Mark Knapp has discussed the process of interpersonal communication in the following manner. The first step is the initial encounter that provides the first impression about the parties involved in the communication process. It might be possible that the first impression is misleading or not correct. The second step is experimenting, where the information about the facts and person is gained slowly, starting from general and then moving towards more particular information. The third step is intensification, where conclusions are being drawn while communicating. The next step is integration, where the decisions made are mutual and agreeable to all in the communication process. The last step is bonding, where the final decision is being sealed with contracts and the decision is made public. Let's now understand the principles of interpersonal communication. There are four basic principles of interpersonal communication as given by Donald King in 2000. These principles are: interpersonal communication is inescapable, irreversible, complicated, and contextual. Let's understand these in detail. So, what are the principles of interpersonal communication? First is, interpersonal communication is inescapable. This is a continuous process and is related with every aspect of life and its stages, be it in the personal life or professional life. Second, interpersonal communication is irreversible. Once interpersonal communication has taken place, it can in no way be retrieved. In formal settings, the official statement may be formally retracted, but its impact on the receiving party cannot be fully erased. There is an Indian saying that an arrow shot from a bow and a word spoken from the mouth can never be taken back. Interpersonal communication is complicated. Experts believe that each communication involves at least 6 aspects. First, who you think you are. Second, who you think the other person is. Third, who you think the other person thinks of you, that who you are. Fourth, who the other person thinks he or she is. Fifth, who the other person thinks you are. Sixth, who the other person thinks you think she is. The quality and dynamics of the entire interpersonal communication depends on the complicated interaction of the understanding of the above aspects by the two parties. The fourth principle of interpersonal communication is contextual. That interpersonal communication is contextual. First, psychological context. It is related with the psychological makeup of the people, their beliefs, needs, desires, attitudes, values, personality, etc. This is about who people are and what they bring to the interaction. Second, relational context. It is concerned with the reaction of one person to the other while communicating with each other. Third, situational context. It deals with location or space component of the communication, that is, where the communication is taking place. A communication that takes place in a conference room is likely to be very different than the communication that takes place in the corridor. Fourth, environmental context. It deals with the physical aspect of the context, that is, the general comfort level of the communication context. The aspects regarding the comfortable furniture, optimum temperature of the room, background noise, etc. are included in it. Fifth, cultural context. It includes all the learned behaviors being a part of a particular culture. It also includes the cultural norms and rules that one is expected to adhere to while interacting. Let's now understand the functions of interpersonal communication. The first function of interpersonal communication is gaining information, necessary to carry out the various functions of the organization. Second, develop better understanding. Interpersonal communication helps in better understanding of the message to be delivered. Since it is done face to face, it helps in getting better idea of what the person actually wants to say and deliver. The third function is satisfying interpersonal needs. Interpersonal communication satisfies the interpersonal needs of affiliation and power, both in social as well as professional domains. The fourth function is establishing identity. Through interpersonal communication, relationships are developed and maintained. Such relationships help in establishing identity of individuals. The fifth function is achievement of goals. One of the most important functions of interpersonal communication is achievement of goals. From the organizational perspective, the goals related to personal selling, employee relations, training and development, building goodwill, etc., are possible to be achieved only through effective interpersonal communication. For individual perspective, the goals related to day-to-day functioning are also largely dependent upon effective interpersonal communication. To be effective in interpersonal communication, we have to first understand what are the barriers to interpersonal communication. These barriers can be differing worldviews, faulty perceptions, diverting, receiver's behavior, sender's behavior, gender differences, and stereotypes and prejudices. Let's now understand these barriers in detail. First, differing worldviews. Worldview is the overall perspective from which an individual or group sees and interprets the world, or what an individual or group believes to be true. Worldview of individuals largely affect the interpersonal communication. If the worldview of mutual communicators is similar, the communication is likely to be smooth and fruitful. If one believes that to progress in an organization, one has to engage in fierce competition with one's peers, then he or she will work for individual gains more than the group gains, and in the process may not be able to maintain good interpersonal communication and relations in the organization. The second barrier is stereotypes and prejudices. Walter Lippmann, in his 1920 book Public Opinion, used the term stereotypes to describe the way people categorize, stamp human beings with a set of characteristics. Stereotyping is very natural to the human mind, which helps in simplifying the complicated truth and enables our body and mind to create automated responses to similar cues. Cultural stereotypes are very often result of or lead to negative opinions about each other. Stereotypes and prejudices are major reasons of communication failures, and more than that, of wrong actions and ugly emotions. The third barrier is faulty perceptions. A person interacts whether as a speaker or a listener on the basis of perception framed in his or her mind about the other person, which may or may not be true. The biggest barrier to communication is faulty perception and making communication based on it. This distorts the communication process. Gender differences. Due to different societal expectations, men and women tend to communicate in patterns which may lead to creating a barrier to effective communication. For ages, men interpersonal communication are quite different than women. Alan Barbara Pease, in their book Why Men Don't Listen and Women Can't Read Maps, describe the different ways the men and women communicate in an interesting way. They state that these striking differences emanate and women made specific contributions for their survival. So men were hunters focused on bringing the food, and women were raising the children and running the family. That resulted in the specialization of their minds for these different functions. Major insight about the gender differences in communication is available in Module 39 of the same paper. Next barrier to communication is diverting. One of the most frequent ways of switching a conversation from the other person's concern to the topic of one's own concern or interest is diverting. It happens when people do not possess the awareness and skills to listen patiently and effectively. Sometimes diversion in the conversation takes place when people want to avoid negative emotions that can be stimulated by that conversation. Not acknowledging the issue can never lead to effective interpersonal communication. The sixth barrier to interpersonal communication is sender's behavior. Sender may not be able to choose the right word to say precisely what he means. Also, the sender may not be fully aware of the intellectual capabilities of the receiver and may use the words or technical jargons which the receiver cannot understand. The next barrier to interpersonal communication is receiver's behavior. Receivers tend to hear through their own filters. There are attention filters and emotional filters, which distort communication process. Attention filters increase the amount of sound and emotional filters block the understanding of a person. Receivers are also easily distracted. Reason for poor attention or listening is that people think faster than they talk. While we listen, we have a lot of spare time for thinking. Let's now discuss about interpersonal conflict and communication. Interpersonal conflict arises when people involved in the communication process do not share the same compatible goals. It can be expressed verbally as well as non-verbally. People should practice the art of managing conflict tactfully. In conflict resolution, personal and social skills are utilized through interpersonal communication to resolve conflicts. Interpersonal communication is a key component of conflict management in organizations to reduce the hostilities and make the environment congenial to carry on the work and achieve goals. There are 5 strategies to manage interpersonal conflict. So, the strategies of management of interpersonal conflict and communication are showed in the diagram. These strategies are competing, collaborating, accommodating, avoiding, and compromising. We will discuss them in detail now. Competing strategy of managing interpersonal conflict. This strategy indicates high concern for oneself and low concern for others. When people are competing, their communication style is such that they strive to win at the cost of the other person. This style of conflict management involves the use of power, either coercive or non-coercive. This style refers to the negative competition between the people. This style of interpersonal communication and conflict management can sustain only for a very short time. Avoiding strategy of managing interpersonal conflict and communication. This style of managing conflict refers to low concern for self and low concern for others as well. This means there is no communication about conflict in this style of managing interpersonal conflict. In this style, conflict is not discussed directly, but it is shown through gestures and other non-verbal activities. Here, the emotions are expressed passively. This is akin to not acknowledging the problem fully, so management of conflict is poor. accommodating style of managing interpersonal conflict and communication. In this style, there is low concern for oneself and more concern for others' feelings and emotions. This style involves passive and submissive style of interpersonal communication, leading to giving less importance to oneself. Adopting such communicative style over a long period of time is likely to lead to frustration and anger in the person and cannot be considered an effective way of conflict management. Compromising strategy of managing interpersonal conflict and communication. This style involves moderate concern for oneself and for others also. It is not a win-win situation, but it is a bit win-lose situation. This style helps in resolving conflict temporarily, but the thoughts of what people gave up to compromise leads to future conflict. Last and the most important, collaborative strategy of managing conflict and communication. This style emphasizes on high degree of concern for oneself as well as for others. Here, assertive interpersonal communication style is used. It is a win-win situation for both the parties involved in conversation because they have reached a solution mutually without compromising. Let's now discuss the guidelines for effective interpersonal communication. Linda Wilcox in 2002 discussed various guidelines for communicating effectively. First, listen effectively. For communicating effectively, a person should listen carefully. Person should not be in a hurry to jump to conclusions and pass the judgment. Proper and enough time should be given to understand the viewpoint of all involved in the communication process. Emphasis should be on gathering facts and making judgments based on those facts. Gain knowledge. Take help from people who possess knowledge about the situation. Gain information about the policies and procedures that might help in communicating effectively. Next is maintain calmness. One should be respectful to others and should not insult others in public. One should learn to manage one's anger. When people are nervous, they converse quickly without exactly knowing about what they are speaking. When person is not relaxed, it is evident in the body language of the person also. People should stay calm and composed to communicate effectively. Next is communicate in a socially acceptable manner. For informal interaction, it refers to the speaker's way of interaction with others. In more formal cases, the communication will depend on the message receiver. How the receiver perceives the speaker in terms of language, appearance, presentation, etc. Fifth guideline is communicate in thoughtful and careful manner. Communication process should be thoughtfully and carefully handled. People should first wait and wisely analyze the whole situation and then proceed further in the communication process. People should act professionally while communicating the viewpoint as their reaction changes the direction of the communication process. Next, practice basic acknowledgement. Person while communicated should nod the head, maintain eye contact, and keep showing gestures which show that one is interested in the interaction. Next is develop the habit of asking questions. Three categories of questions can be asked: close-ended questions, which will result in answering into yes or no. These type of questions do not provide much information, as the questions do not answer the underlying motive of the person. For example, are you all right? Second type of questions can be direct questions. These questions are for specific situation to know the information regarding people about the situation. For example, can you tell me what happened? Third type of questions can be open-ended questions. They help in gaining more extensive information about the situation. For example, explain the problem in detail. The next guideline is listening reflectively. To reaffirm that the person heard is the same what the other person said, there is a need to repeat key words or express the whole idea in one's own words. This helps in getting the right message. Next is maintain silence. Practicing pause after the sentence helps in absorbing the information by the listeners. Next is empathizing. Empathizing with the people one is communicated with is very important to understand their viewpoint. This helps to build mutual trust, leading to fruitful interpersonal communication. The next guideline for effective interpersonal communication is learn to be assertive. People should aim to be neither passive nor aggressive. Being assertive is about expressing the feelings and beliefs in a way that others can understand and respect. Assertiveness is fundamental to successful negotiation. To gain detailed insights on how to communicate assertively, Module 37 may be referred. Next guideline is reflect and improve. A person should learn from the previous success and failures in communication processes and try to apply that learning in subsequent interpersonal interactions. Let's now understand a model to develop effective interpersonal communication, which was given by Joseph Luft and Harry Ingham. This model is known as Johari's window. This model is very useful in describing human interaction and to understand communication and interaction with people better. Johari window may help people as individuals, as team managers, and also as organizational heads. In the diagram, we can see that cell 1 is the arena or open area of communication. This consists of information known simultaneously by oneself and the others. Cell 2, that is blind spot, is information known by others but not known by oneself. One of the purposes of sensitivity training is to reduce the size of the blind spot through providing increased honest feedback from others about one's personal style of communication. The old phrase, even your best friend will not tell you, is indicative of the existing of such class of information. Cell 3 hidden is a class of information known to ourselves but not to others. It is the protective front that all people find necessary to some degree in order to defend the self. Cell 4, that is unknown, is that information which exists but is unknown to all. Hall suggests that this is indicative of a hidden potential, the unconscious, or the database of creativity. So, let's now discuss arena in detail. Communication will be enhanced If cell 1, the open space or arena, is increased in size and the other cells blind spot, hidden and unknown are reduced in size. The arena includes not only facts but also the information about individuals such as emotions, behavior, expectations and needs. While working in organizations, it is important to first know the environment and culture of the company and then slowly unfold yourself, nature, talents, characteristics in organizations, resulting in the widening of the arena. Hidden. While working with new people, do not completely open the hidden space, but take time to learn about colleagues. If heading a team, one should know how much of the confidential information to put across to team members. Hidden area of a person is reduced by self-disclosure. At the same time, it is important to try and get to know people at the workplace. And this can happen only when you build a relationship of trust. Also, revelations about oneself should be done only when the other person is trustworthy and there is possibility of reciprocity where the other person might also disclose about his or her own self. Talking about the blind area. The blind space represents things about a person that he or she do not know but others know. The blind space can be reduced by asking for feedback from colleagues and seniors. Also, on the other hand, it is the duty of the senior people as well as the peers to provide feedback to an individual about his strengths, weaknesses, potential, and good or bad habits. For example, a person may be given the feedback that he tends to dominate the meetings and don't allow others to speak, which is not good for team's performance and healthy interpersonal relationships. On getting to know this, the person's arena will expand and we will try to modify his behavior in the next meeting by giving a chance to others to speak. This picture in a humoristic way shows the blind spot of an individual who's sleeping on the desk. This person is sleeping in the office hours and also snoring. The other person is holding a placard that someone please tell him about his snores. But since this might be a very sensitive topic, many people in the personal as well as public life will not want to tell him that. And so he will not be able to improve himself or take certain steps to manage the situation. So, feedback is a very important mechanism so that the information in the blind spot can be moved to the arena spot where the individual knows about his characteristics and is ready to work on them. The dark space quadrant represents aspects that no one knows. These are the areas of self-discovery that reveal themselves only when one ventures into new areas and accept new challenges. So managers should build an environment in the organization where people discover new things about themselves. This model is applicable in various ways. The interesting part of the model is that it can be applied in multiple situations such as negotiation, team dynamics, and interpersonal communication. So, students, let's now understand what we have understood in this module. Interpersonal communication is a process where exchange of ideas, information is done between two or more people. To understand interpersonal communication, we learned about the categorization, process, principles, and functions of interpersonal communication. To understand how to develop effective interpersonal communication skills, barriers have to be understood and overcome. Interpersonal communication can be improved by following certain guidelines which were discussed in the module. Thank you.